Hello, 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 people. Good to see you. Morning. Good morning. Does everyone have their coffee? It's a very nice day in Toronto, in Scarborough today. I actually have my door kind of open a little bit. Uh, so yeah, this is gonna be pretty fun. I think we're gonna take you through how to code HTML, what HTML is all about, how you can use it to create interfaces, and yeah, we're gonna start right from the bottom and go up from there. So let me know in the chat window where you're from, where you're watching from, what do you do now, um, and please feel free to ask any questions in the chat window. I'll try and keep an eye out on it, and if you have any questions, I can stop and dwell on something if we want. Um, okay, we'll just give maybe 1 or 2 minutes for a few more people to get on the stream, and then we will get going. Oh, so one thing, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel. That's always helpful for me and for you. You get notifications if you hit the notification bell. You get notifications whenever I post new content. Like next Friday, I'm doing a live show with two product designers actually, and we're going to talk about how to get different, mostly how to get started in product design and things like that. So, good morning, Reza. How are you? Okay, we'll start. I'll give one more minute and then we'll get into things. How does that sound? So the way we'll do this is I usually plan about an hour or so, but I find that like there's just so much stuff to talk about. I usually go over a bit, so we can go into we'll probably go about an hour and a half at least as me just talking, and depending how many questions there are throughout, we might have like a question period afterwards. We'll see. We'll keep it fairly fluid. I like to keep things fairly agile, let's say. All right, we got some people from Mississauga. All right, UX course from York. Awesome. I'm from Toronto. UXPA. Amazing. I'm a new. Cool. Okay. Yeah, next week I'm actually teaching. I'm doing the same thing, but for York University. So that should be fun. And okay, let's get started. It's 3 after. Okay, so I just want to give you a super brief intro on who I am just before we get started. So my name is Carmen. You can lots of different ways to get in touch with me. Email's really good. Add me to LinkedIn. I post lots of things on my LinkedIn account, job positions, announcements about events and stuff upcoming. So look for me on LinkedIn, and then also, like I said, subscribe to my YouTube channel. Okay, so me, who am I? So I have 3 degrees. The first 2 I did at Ryerson University in Toronto. It was Ryerson is a cool school. It was a college or a polytechnic, as they called it, until the early 90s, and then it switched to university. So it had that kind of college applied feel to it. So that was a pretty cool place to go to school. So I did 2 degrees there. I did computer science and I did management science. So computer science is where I really learned to program and learned about, all that computer sciencey type stuff. And then I did a PhD in industrial engineering at the University of Toronto, where I studied vibrotactile interfaces as a way to communicate music to people with disabilities. So right now, let's work backwards. Right now, I'm working at Loblaw Digital, which is the digital subsidiary of, I think it's the biggest corporation in Canada, Loblaw. And so right now, I'm working on grocery delivery, and as you can imagine, that's super busy right now. So I'm working as a designer for Loblaw Digital. I was also before there, I was at a smaller company called Orbit Group. I think there was a few people on this stream from Orbit Group, actually. So I worked there for about more than 2 years, doing all their front end stuff. And interestingly enough, so a lot of designers don't usually use code, but at Orbit, I actually used HTML code, Bootstrap, CSS, JavaScript to create prototypes. And then I just handed the prototypes to our developers. So interesting. That's kind of where, that's why I centered this around designers, because HTML can be useful for designers. Before that, I worked for the banks in Canada. I worked for CIBC and RBC and a few different, mostly as a UX designer and a prototyper. Before that, I was a professor at Centennial College for about 2 years. I taught dozens and dozens of courses, programming, mostly technology stuff, exactly like the stuff we're going to talk about right now. Yeah, you can definitely have the link to watch this later, no problem, for sure. Okay, and then before that, I was a researcher at Ryerson where I did all sorts of stuff. Mostly a researcher developer. I built websites, applications, and okay, no more about me. Let's get right into it. So I have I have a note view that I want to start here, and we're gonna start right at the very beginning, which is probably even before we get into HTML, we just have to quickly understand what a text file is versus other types of text files with text in it, right? So I just want to differentiate between a text file and a Microsoft Word document, right? So right now I'm typing in Word. When I save this document, it's going to save as a docx file. Now when you open it, you see text in there, but really what's also in there is all sorts of formatting information, right? Is this bold? What font is this? So if you looked inside the actual file, it's not just text, right? So when we're working with HTML or any other code, if other people are used to coding with other technologies, the first thing that we need to understand is that we need to use a text file, not like a Word file, but a text file. So let's go to my file view here. Oops, messed that up. Okay. Oh, where'd my other? Okay, I'm going to transition to here. Okay, so I'm going to go to, I made a folder, okay, on my computer in HTML tutorial. So this is just a folder in Windows, right? And I'll delete this file just so that we're in the very, very beginning state. So I want to start to create an HTML file. Well, how do I even get started? Well, one of the ways you can do that is, so in Windows, if you go here onto your browser and you type new, you can go to new text document. Okay. Now, one thing you'll notice is if you do this, so one thing I recommend is you follow along with this. Try and do whatever I do on your computer too. Try and follow along. So learn while doing and also learn while listening. So you'll notice that on my view, hopefully you can see that there. Maybe I can zoom in a little bit. On my view, I can see the extension on the end of my file. That's really important. The Windows and Mac, out of the box, it doesn't show that for you. So in order to get to show that on Windows, what you do is you hit Window key and you go and you just type show extensions. File extensions. Yeah, show file extensions. And then it'll bring up this. Oops. Let me see here. Quickly, file extensions. I don't want to spend too much. Show file extensions. So in Windows, there's a way, I don't want to spend too much time. There's a way to turn that on. So you need to be able to see the file extensions of your file. And we'll see why in a minute. Because what I want to do is, so this is a text file, remember. So this is only, inside this text file is only text information. But what I want to do is I'm going to change the file name. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to call it index, because that's just the standard. For some reason, the first opening file in an HTML website is called index, right? It's sort of just a historical standard. And then the file extension that's going to tell your computer, the browsers, what type of file this is, or give it a hint at least. We're going to put HTML at the end of that file. Okay? So now Windows is going to ask me if I want to change the extension, because it changes the behavior. Right now it's going to open up in a browser instead of opening up in whatever, text editor or whatever, right? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open this text file with a text editor, right? So a text editor are things like, there's many different versions or types of text editors. So there's a bunch of examples, free ones. There's lots of free ones. There's one called TextPad. Like the one out of the box in Windows is called Notepad. I don't recommend using that. It's very doesn't have a lot of good features. There's one called Note++. There's Sublime. And these are all either free or you can buy them for 30 or 40 bucks or whatever. Today I'm going to use Dreamweaver. Dreamweaver comes with Adobe Creative Suite. I happen to have that suite already because I use it a lot of other tools. I wouldn't recommend Dreamweaver as if you don't need Photoshop, Illustrator, Premiere. I wouldn't recommend Dreamweaver really as a text editor, because a lot of these other ones, I think Note++ is free and it does the job just fine. So today I'm going to use Dreamweaver, but so a text editor is essentially like Word is, right? Like I'm working in Word and it's editing Word files. So a text editor is the equivalent, but for text files. And it's going to give you a lot of handy tools to manipulate your code. Okay. So let's switch over back to our file view. Okay. So what we have to do now is I want to edit this file. I want to go in and I'm going to start putting in my HTML code. So what I can do is go to either open with, and I'll just select Adobe Dreamweaver and it will open up in Dreamweaver. So now I'm going to switch over to my code view. Okay, so this is Dreamweaver. It's just, you can enter in your text up here. On the left there's a file browser and you have your menus and stuff at the top. It works just like all the text editors mostly work the same, and then some of them have little differences here and there, like code color. They color the code differently, or they have different code organizational things that are a little bit different. Like, because one of the ways you need to structure your code properly, and sometimes there's automated tools that will do that for you. Okay, so this is our text editor, but before that, let's just go to my note view again really quickly. So I want to explain what HTML is, okay? So HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. And what it was developed by a guy named Tim Berners-Lee about 20 years ago. And it was made to essentially, so Tim Berners-Lee was a PhD, like a researcher. And with academic research, you have journal articles, right? And then at the back of the journal article, there's always references that reference other journal articles. So this Tim Berners-Lee was like, geez, what if we had this computer code where you could have your article and then the link would be in the article. You could click the link and it would go to another article. Wouldn't that be cool? And so he made HTML basically for that, for academic journals. And then from there, it just exploded and became used in so many different things, right? So the key element of HTML, the key thing that we work with in hypertext markup language are these things called HTML elements, right? And the way we create elements is we mark up text, right? Hence hypertext markup language. We mark up text with tags, okay? And so what happens is when you put tags around something, text, the text inside that tag becomes that thing. So let's say, for example, we had like my name, Carmen, right? And then I put around Carmen tags called cool, right? So I'm going to open my tag with a... So on the right side, we have the opening tag, which is two little angled brackets with the type of the tag inside. And then on the right side of the word, you have the same thing but with a slash, and then the angled bracket. So what that means is Carmen is now cool, right? Because you've put cool tags around Carmen, making Carmen cool, right? And so that's basically, that's the that's the gist of it. That's like 90% of HTML right there, is putting tags around things to make them that. Now, of course, it's not going to be cool. It's going to be things like headers, paragraphs, buttons, links, and all that stuff, and we're going to go through that now, okay? But essentially, the underlying concept of HTML and other MLs, whenever you see XML, uses this same markup language principle, okay? So we're going to wrap tags around things and make them things. Okay, back to my code view. Okay, so let's do something. Let's put in let's start building our web page. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in some text, just some basic text. Carmen Brange's really cool website. Okay, how can you guys see that? Maybe I'm going to blow this up a little bit. View code, view mode. You know what? I can just shrink the window and it should. Whoops, not that window. Yeah, okay, this is much better. And we'll hide this because we don't really need this. How do I get rid of this? Okay, shrink this over. And we'll make this smaller. Okay, so we have a start to our website already. So what I'm going to do now, so you can see there's a little star. See there how there's a star beside my file name, index.html? That means I haven't saved it. So I'm going to Control S, and I'm going to save my file. And then I'm going to go to my browser view. Or no, actually, let's go to my file view. So if I right-click on here and say open with browser, my Chrome browser, it's going to open up in your browser, right? So you can there's two ways to open your file, like the back end to open it up and see the code and edit the code, and then your browser, that's the front end, to see what the code is going to be rendered into. So I'm going to open up in Chrome. I have it set up here, so I'm just going to switch to my Chrome view here, and I'm going to hit refresh. Whoops. Let me see. I'm going to reload this. Okay, here we go. So you can see already, I'll shrink this. We already have a website, sort of. Right? I have the text, but it's just text. And technically we haven't even had any text element, any HTML elements yet. So this is really really basic. So the first thing we want to do is we want to tell the browser that everything in this document, all the text that we're going to put in it is HTML code. So how do we do that, right? Well, how did we make Carmen cool? Is we put cool tags around him, right? So that's how we're going to make HTML is we're going to put HTML tags around everything, okay? So that's our outermost tag, essentially. So on the very top, I'm going to put an opening HTML tag, and then you saw Dreamweaver automatically said, oh, you need a closing tag for this, and put it there. Sometimes I find that it's not very helpful, because what I actually want to do is put it down here, right? So now everything, and even Dreamweaver makes this like a collapsible section now. So everything between here and here is HTML. Okay, so now there's two main sections inside an HTML document, okay? There's the head and the body, okay? And the way we do that, just like we do with HTML, is we use tags. So I'm going to type head, and then Dreamweaver was nice enough to close my tag for me. And then the other section is going to be body. So I open with a body tag, and then again Dreamweaver sticks that in. So now I'm going to put this on a new line, because there's going to be lots and lots of stuff that's going to go into my body, right? Now, stuff that goes into the body, that is stuff that you will see on the browser, right? That's basically a good way to think about what's in the body, right? So I'm going to go in here and boom, fire this up. Okay, so now my text, Carmen Brange's really cool website, is in the body, right? So that means it's going to appear on the browser window. Now the thing with what we put in the head, okay, it's like, think of it as like administratorial stuff, right? Like, so what we put in there are links to libraries, right? Links to other resources. One tag you can put in there is called the title tag, which see on my tab here in my browser, See, it just says index.html. So we can change that by putting a tag in the head, because technically it's not, even though you see it, it's not appearing in the body. The body is everything that's in this white space below your address bar, right? This is your tab, that's different, okay? So again, everything in the body appears on the website, and everything in the head doesn't. It's like it's like management stuff, right? It links and other things that you need but won't appear on the website. Okay. So let's make our first HTML tag. So first let's save this, and let's go to our browser view again and refresh. And you'll notice nothing's changed, right? It's still just text. Because now if we go, what we can do in Chrome is we can view the code in Chrome. So if I right click, you can't see the window, but I right clicked, and then I'm going to click inspect. It's the bottom thing at the bottom, okay? And that's going to open up my browser, and it's going to give me this view, which gives me the view of the code. So see, now I can see, even though I still just see Carmen Brange is really cool, I see that my body tag is indeed there, right? And then here's my closing body and my HTML tag. So this inspect view in Chrome is absolutely crucial to you as a HTML developer, right? You're going to be in here all the time. This is where you debug things, right? Because it's not like application programming where, like, let's say if you're working in C# or C++ or something, where you have your IDE and you debug in your IDE and then you have an application. Because HTML code is interpreted, not compiled, so you need to debug it essentially in the browser, right? Now, we're not going to talk about JavaScript and that stuff, but you can do, there's some like serious debugging stuff you can do using this Chrome thing, but I'm going to close it for now. Okay, so we want to make, this is going to be my really cool website, and I want to make text big, right? I don't want just a little plain text. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce our first HTML header, and that is going to be the H1 tag, right? So there's 6 levels of header tags. H1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6. Okay? So what we do is we type open bracket, H1, close. And then see, like, Dreamweaver closed it for me, which was a bit of a pain because really I want this closing tag. Now I have to go in and move it and cut it. I want it over here. Okay? And then I'm going to save it. And so now that text inside H1 is a header. Okay, so let's go back to our browser and refresh, and boom, now we have big text, right? So I'll just give you a heads up. We're not going to talk about CSS much, but CSS is the kind of sister technology to HTML. So you'll see this is sort of boring. It's like Times New Roman or something, this font. This is the styling of HTML out of the box. It's the default styling, right? So H1, let's see, I wonder if Chrome will tell us. So I'm going to go in here and inspect. And we can probably see, yeah, see, it tells us the font size. It's in ems, right? Ems is a relative sizing, okay? In HTML, you can size things in 2 ways. Relative and absolute, right? So you can say, I want something to be 100 pixels wide, or you could say, I want something to be 20% wide. And we'll get into that. Well, actually, that's more of CSS stuff, so we might not get into that. But see all this stuff in here? This is CSS styling, right? So the way I always think about it, HTML is like the frame of your house, right? The wood frames that you put up. That gives it the structure, right? This is the living room, this is the basement, this is the TV room, this is the garage, right? But it's just a frame. It doesn't have any, like, you wouldn't want to live in that kind of house because it wouldn't have walls and stuff. CSS is like the walls and the paint and the brick and the lighting, right? It gives color and flavor to the structure that is HTML. So what you do with HTML is you define the relationships between your elements, right? So for example, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back to my code, and I'm going to create my second HTML element, which is H2, right? So I've created an H2 element, and in this case, I can just type here. And then I'm going to have my subheader, right? Because I have my heading and then my subheader. So I'm going to say, this is the portfolio site of Carmen Brange. Okay, so what I've done now is I have defined the relationship between this element and this element, essentially by saying this element is underneath this element. And I mean, it seems a little trivial, but that's important. You need to define that. And so you use HTML to define that. The other relationship could be inside, right? You can nest elements inside each other, and we're going to look at how you do that. Okay, so now let's save this and go back to our browser. Whoops. How did that go big? Hang on one second. Gotta shrink my head. Whoops. Okay, transition back here. So back to our browser, and I'm gonna refresh, and we'll see our second. This is our second subheading. Okay, so now we're using H1 and H2. Okay, so let's use another. Let's do another HTML tag. So let's do a paragraph, right? Because you probably have a header, a subheader, and then some kind of paragraph text. So one thing that we can look at is you can use this thing lorem ipsum. It's a commonly used block of text that it's really just gobbledygook, but it sort of looks like English, right? Because sometimes you need just placeholder text to use, right? So this is lorem ipsum. See how it looks like Latin kind of, but it's gobbledygook. But it's meant to have the spacing more or less of English. So we're gonna take a paragraph from here. Whoops. Oh, this is it here. You didn't see my view. So this is lorem ipsum here, and I'm just gonna take a block of this text from this website. I'm gonna go back. Let's go to my coding view. So now I'm gonna go. I'm gonna create a paragraph, right? So the tag for paragraph is P. So then inside my P graph, I'm gonna in my P tag, I'm gonna paste in my text. Okay. Now, one thing to remember is that HTML ignores most white space. Okay. So if I were to, I'm going to save this. Oh, why does it keep doing that? It keeps making, I keep doing my shortcut on my video thing. One sec. Sorry. Just messed up my view again. There we go. Okay, so we're going to go back here, and I saved my code. I'm going to refresh. Okay, so here's our text. Now, if I go back to my code view, okay, and let's say I go here between H2 and paragraph, and I create a whole bunch of new lines, right? By pressing enter, I created a whole bunch of white space, and I save it. I'm going to save this now. And I go back to my code view and refresh it. That's not reflected in the browser, right? So HTML usually ignores all white space except for the first one. So if you have like a word and then a space, it'll respect that. But like all this white space here, it won't respect. So you have to use CSS to create that white space. So in CSS, there's properties of your elements like margin and padding and borders, right? So you can create, margin is the space on the outside of your element, and you can expand that, and that's how you create white space. Another way that you're not really supposed to do it this way, it's just not good practice generally, is you use what's called the line break tag, which is, it's just a single tag. It doesn't have a closing tag, but what that does is it forces a new line break in your HTML. Sometimes I just use it because I'm like, I just need a line break here right now. And so if I create 4 or 5 of these and then I go to my code, my browser, then the space is going to be there, right? But generally, you're not supposed to use BRs, right? It's not good practice. You should use CSS, but you'll have to come back to my CSS tutorial and learn about CSS to do that. So today it's not, our web page isn't going to look like much because really we need CSS to then, once we have the structure, to sort of arrange it, lay it out, and do all that layout stuff, right? Change the font, change the sizing, change the color, put a nice background, all that stuff. You need CSS, but we'll get to that. Okay, we created a paragraph tag. So I got rid of my line break tags. So now if I refresh, back to here again. Okay? Okay, back to our code. So what should we do now? So let's, I want to create we can have some visual, something nice to look at. We're not going to do like CSS, but how do we get a picture into our website? So this is there's two parts to this, because it's not just the tag itself. There's also, obviously, right, or maybe not obviously, but you need an image file to display, right? So with our text tags, it was just text, but now we need to introduce a file. Okay, so let's go back to our file view here. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to Google and I'm going to download whatever, like a background, or no, let's say like a cute cat picture or something, right? I'm going to go to Google and I'm going to go to my browser and I'm going to right click on my picture, click Save As, and I'm going to save it into my folder here, into my, oops, no, that's the wrong one. Gotta save image as, into my HTML. So I'm gonna save this as cat.jpg. Okay, so now notice in my file, you can see in my folder here, I have a file now, because you need an image, right? You can't have a picture without the picture. So you need to have that file somewhere, right? So that you can reference it in your HTML tag. Okay, so we've downloaded the file. We've put it beside our index in the same folder as our index HTML file. Okay, let's go back to our code now. So now we're going to create an image tag, okay? And actually, this is going to introduce another concept that we haven't really talked about yet, which are tag attributes, okay? So we're going to create an image tag, and it's, again, an image tag is self-closing because there's no text to encapsulate. So it's just, there's no closing part of the image tag. Okay, now, what we have to do is we have to give an attribute to this image tag, right? So an attribute is basically, like, think of me. So think of any entity, like a person, like me. So one of my attributes is my name. My name is Carmen, right? Another attribute is my age. I'm 38. Another attribute is my weight. I'm like, with coronavirus, I'm more like 205 now. I'm getting a little corona belly. Right, but you see what I mean, right? It's like a property of myself. My hair is blonde, right? Let's say whatever other my shirt color is black or whatever. So it's an attribute of the element, of the entity. So what attribute do you think we need for an image tag, right? Well, it's the file name. That's the first thing we need to start with, anyways. So it's sort of weird. HTML has some weird ways of referencing things. Like it uses a lot of short forms and weird things that I think come out of print. But anyway, so for example, in image, so the way we do attributes is we stick them in the first opening HTML tag, right? So we go right before the tag is closed, and then we put some white space there. And I'm gonna put some text in there. So what I'm gonna say source, right? That's my attribute. That's the attribute label, equals, and then I'm gonna have quote, because I'm gonna put a string in there where I'm going to basically reference the file name that I put in the folder, right? So if we go back here, what was if we remember I'm going to click on here and I'm going to copy it, because one of the biggest sources of error, if you guys work with code already, you'll probably know, is just typing the wrong thing, right? like putting the file name, but the file name is wrong. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the file name. So when I go back to my code here and paste it, right, it's going to be right. Okay, so now I saved my document, and now let's go back to the browser, and now we see our little cute kitty cat here, right? Pretty cool, right? So, we're going to cheat a little bit. Now, normally, if you want to resize images and things, you should use CSS. That's the standard. That's the practice. But there are still some things you can do in HTML. Oh, I didn't switch. This is our kitty view, right? So here's the picture of our cat. So we can right click on here again and click inspect. I right clicked on the kitty and then clicked inspect, and then we went here. So here you can see our tag that we put in, right? And we can expand the paragraph here. We can see lorem ipsum. It's all in this little coding window, and we can see our cat picture. So what if we want to make this smaller? Instead of 500 pixels across, maybe 100. We want it to be a thumbnail or something. Well, like I said, if you were doing this for real, you should use CSS. But for today, I'm just going to show you, again, just to kind of hammer home attributes. What you can, so another attribute of an image is the height and the width, right? Just like attribute of me is my weight. So what I like to use, you can set the width of one size. So you say width equals, again, quote, quote, and then we're going to put in, let's make it 100. So that should make it 100 pixels wide, right? So now if we go back to here, look, the kitty cat is nice and small now. Right? Now, again, you can do the exact same thing in CSS, and I recommend that because you can't style everything like I just showed you, and so you don't want some style in HTML, some style in CSS. You want to keep modularity and keep all your style in CSS and all your structure, right, the relationships between elements in HTML, okay? Okay, so that's our image tag. So I started this whole thing off by saying that Tim Berners-Lee invented HTML so that he could click on a reference to another paper and be immediately taken to that other paper. So I'm going to show you the link tag because that's kind of what makes the web, right? Is linking. If you didn't have that, you don't really have the web, right? You don't really have HTML. I guess, right? Like, I mean, you do, but really it's the most important thing. Okay, so now in my code, I'm going to use the link tag, which remember I said HTML has these weird rules and stuff from like, I think it's tradition, or you know how things just sort of stay on, like things switch, but what's an example? Like, did you know when cars were first invented, they were steered with a tiller because that's what boats used to be steered with. And things like, I work on grocery and we have flyers, which I think are related. It's called a flyer because it's made of paper, but we don't make them in paper anymore. So anyways, you get what I mean. So the link tag is A. I'm not really sure why. There's probably you could look it up. I don't know why. It's not really important, I guess. You just have to remember a link is A. Okay. And then again, here's another one. So now we need to give it an attribute, right? Just like we did for image tag, we need to give our link an attribute. So what do you think the most important link attribute is? Well, where the link is going to go. And again, instead of just using source or something like destination or something reasonable, the attribute name is href. Okay. I guess that maybe Tim Berners-Lee came up with that one. I don't know. It kind of sucks, but this is what we have. So then href equals quote, quote. I always like to close things. So if I have an opening quote, I'll create the closed quote right away so that I don't forget to put it later. And then I just go in the middle and I expand it. And that really helps with a lot of missing tags and missing quotations and things like that. Okay, so then again, Dreamweaver closed my tag for me, and then it's waiting for me to put some text in this link tag because a link is you need a closing tag, because remember, what it's going to do is change just regular text into a link, right? So let's put like Google, for example. Okay, so that's the text, right? So if I save that and go to my browser and then refresh, so now I have a link here. Now if I click it, it's not going to go anywhere because I haven't told it. That's just the label. That's not the destination. So let's go back to the code. Oh, sorry. No, the trend. This is the browser. So we have our link, but if you click it, it goes nowhere. So let's go back to the code. So now you can, right, now we have to put the address in our in the link code. Okay. So we just typed www.google.com. Actually, we might have to put in the HTTP. Okay, and then I'm going to save and switch back to our browser and refresh. Okay, hit Google, and boom, there we go. We're taken to Google. Let's go back. Okay. So you'll notice that some elements automatically line break and some don't. So you'll notice after this image, it doesn't automatically break. But after the H1, so if I go, let's go back to our coding view here, and I put H2 on the same line as H1 and save it, and then I go back here, it won't change anything. It's still on a new line, right? Like that, it's not a new line because it's running out of space, right? That's how it is. So some elements are called block elements, which means it takes up the whole row, right? It takes, and anything and then it has a line break at the end. And then, so the next thing will be on a new line. So H1 is like that, it's block. H2, paragraph, is like that. Now you can turn that off with CSS. Sometimes you do. Generally I wouldn't recommend a lot of that stuff, but you can. Sometimes there's reasons why you want to do it. Now notice, so an image is not line breaking. It's called an inline type. So that means you can, like, because a lot of times you're going to have images right beside each other. You don't always want images on a new line, right? So that's the difference between, and there's other types, but those are the main ones, basically block and inline. Okay, let's look at some other super cool HTML tags. What else do you guys want to look at? Let's look at, okay, let's do some stuff in the head, because we haven't really worked with the head yet. So I'm going to go up into the header part, the head, not the header, because the header is really like a part on your web page that you might have. But the head is a specific section of code in your HTML file. So what we're going to do here is, remember I said I wanted to set the label of this thing here. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. So the way we do that is with the title tag. So in my in the head, I'm going to put the title tag, and then I'm going to type the title that I want. Carmen's super cool website. Okay, I'm going to save that, and then go back to my browser, and then refresh. And now notice my my tab title is different. It's what the text that I put in there, right? So technically it's not appearing in the body. So what I told you before about stuff in the head not appearing in the body is true. Okay. What else can we do? So I think probably the next thing that we want to do is we'll look at tables, and we will look at forms, because those are very commonly used things. So what should we look at first? Let's look at tables, because tables are kind of fun. Tables are somewhat advanced in that, so now we're going to start nesting elements. We haven't nested elements. Yeah, tables is a good one to do now. So we're going to go back to our code, and we're going to create, let's say we wanted to have like a schedule or something. Okay, So if we want to create a table in HTML, this is a tag that actually makes sense. The tag for table is table. So then I like to put table on multiple rows, because now what we're going to do is we have to go inside and we have to define rows and columns. Okay? So if we want, the way we define a row is we go inside our tag now. Okay? Because we're going to have tables, and inside our table we're going to have rows and columns. Okay? So the way we do a row, and this one sort of makes sense but not really, is tr. Okay? So that means we're going to have a row. That means one row. So if we want to have 3 rows, what we're going to do is copy and paste this 3 times. 1, 2, 3. Okay? So now we have 3 rows, but we don't really have anything yet, because a row really can't exist without a column, right, to create a cell. Right? You need like a row and a column go together to create a cell. Otherwise, you don't really have anything. So what I'm going to do is also, I'm going to put these rows on new lines and create some white space between them, because I'm going to put stuff inside the rows, right? And then in the rows, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create one column for now. And the way we do that, this is one of the ones that make no sense, is TD. TD is the HTML tag for a column. I get the T, it's related to table. D, I don't know. Maybe, again, it might be some print design thing that I'm unaware of. Doesn't really matter. Just you got to remember that. Okay, so now I'm going to copy and paste these in here like so. Okay? And save. So now you see how I have one row with one column in it, another row with another column in it, and another row. So 3 rows with one column in each one. So now I'm going to save it, go to our browser, refresh, and you don't see anything because I haven't put anything in the table. So let's go back, and in my table I'm going to put 1, 2, 3. Okay? And we're going to go back to the browser and transition. Here we go. Okay, there we go. So now we have our table. Now you can't really see. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on the border for the table, because whenever I'm working with tables, even if I'm ultimately not going to have a border, I like to turn it on just so I can see what's happening, right? So you can do it with, there's 2 ways to do it. You can do it with HTML, and you can also do it with CSS. Maybe I'll just do it with CSS really quickly. I just have to table border HTML attribute. Just gonna look up I think it's just border, but I just want to confirm border attribute. Yeah, I think it's just border, and then it's just 1. Yeah, see, I don't usually use this because I just do the CSS. But let's try the HTML. If we can't figure it out, we'll have to use CSS. So you can see we saw the numbers, but we didn't see the border. So what I'm going to do is just go into here into the table and turn on the border attribute, quote, quote, equals 1. I'm pretty sure that'll turn on our border. It does. Okay, let's go back. So now we can see our table with the borders. Right? So we can see the structure a little bit better. So let's go back and let's put in more text just so we can kind of see what's going on here. This is row 1, column 1. Right? And then I'll paste this in here. And then row 2, column 1. Okay. And now let's go back to our browser, refresh. And there we go. See that? Row 1, column 1, row 2, column 1, row 3, column 1. So how do we add? Let's add a column on the right. We want to add another column. So the way we do this, we have to go into each row and add a column. So I would just double this up. Oops, I'm just going to copy and paste this. Now I have 2 columns in each one. And so now I'm just going to change the text so it's correct. So column 1, row 1, column 2, row 2, column 2, row 3, column 2. Save, back to our browser and now refresh. Oh, shoot. Oh, yeah. Okay. So this is what I just did. Sorry. Sometimes I forget to transition. So what I did is I added a new column tag inside each row. Okay. And then I changed the text so that it's correct. This is row 2, column 2. Okay. So I didn't touch the rows. So I save that. Now I'm going to go back to my browser and refresh. And now I have an extra column. Okay. Now, if I want to create another row, right? Let's go back. Let's add another row on the 4th row on the bottom. So transition back to my code here. Let me just move out of the way a little, or move my code up. So now I'm just going to copy this whole row, right? This is a row with 2 columns. I'm just going to copy that whole thing and paste under. And now I have, this is row... No, wait, this should say 3. This is row 4, column 1, column 2. So save, go back to browser, refresh, boom. Now we got another row. Okay? So that is tables. Now it can get a lot, there's different attributes. You can do row spanning. So you can have one row cut across columns and things like that. It can get quite complex. And mastering tables is one of the harder things to master in HTML. Because you see, the other things are just kind of like in the other code, you don't have this nesting. Like here we have 3 layers of nesting just for one element, right? Okay, what was the other? Oh yeah, forms. Forms was the other big thing that I wanted to show you. Forms are huge and very helpful, obviously, right? So form elements include things like text fields, buttons, radio buttons, checkboxes. All those things provide a lot of interactivity right out of the box, right? So forms is one of the better ones. So you can have form elements outside of a quote-unquote form, but we're going to do it properly, and we're going to not really properly, but like kind of the standard way. Because a lot of functionality comes with it if you use a form element and put the form elements inside a form, proper form. So we're going to create a form by using the form tag. That's a pretty easy one, right? Now, so everything inside my form is going to be a form element, or all the form elements in there are going to be part of this form. Now you might have other things, like you might have an H3, like username, for example, right? That's not a form element, but is part of the form, right? But so now we're going to create an input. So what we do is, that's pretty it's one of the better ones, better labeled fields. So we just say input, and there's no closing tag for input. And then we're going to give it a type, an attribute called type, and we're going to make this one text. Okay. So now let's save, refresh, go back here, and now we have a form. So now I can click on here and type text input, right? So see all that functionality that came out of the box? So one, you get this little highlighting thing. There's no hover state, but you can enter in your text. You can do all that cool stuff. Now it looks kind of boring now. You'll notice a lot of text fields nowadays are styled nicely. They're nice and big. They have bigger text. That you do with CSS. So everything you can restyle using CSS, right? Okay, so that is the form. Let's put a button into our form field. So easy enough on HTML. Well, there's all sorts of different interactive. There's a couple of different ways to do it. One way is you can use an input type called submit, and that will actually automatically submit the form to a script. Okay, so one way is to do it like this: input type equals submit. Oops, submit, and then value equals submit button. So that's value is the text that's going to appear on the button. So I save that and go back to my browser and refresh. And so now I have this button. So you'll notice it tried to submit it. Like it's almost like a link now, because so what you would do for that is in your code, in your form up here. This is advanced stuff. JavaScript. We would put in some JavaScript links that would then take that form, take that data, and do something with it. Usually like send it to a database, or like check the input for validity, like is there anything there, or is it too long or too short or something like that. Another way is there is just a button element in HTML, right? So if we go back, we're on our code here, and if we go to let's see here, go here, and we just type we'll get rid of this, delete, and it's just button. Okay, and then even you can say type equals button, because there are other types. Okay, it's a little redundant. And then inside our tag, then we type submit form. But what this won't submit it automatically. What you have to do now is put some custom JavaScript functionality in there to actually make it do anything when you click the button. But you still get a button, right? So there's always, kind of somewhat annoyingly, there's sometimes 2 or 3 ways to do things in HTML. So that's kind of one way. So we have our, let's put in another text field. Let's go back to our code. Let's put in, we'll use another, so we'll put another H3. We'll change this to password, and we will change this to, the type will be password, because what that'll do now is the text that I have in there will show up as little stars, right? So now we'll save, go back to our browser, and refresh. Okay, and now we have our password. You can't see what I'm typing. Blah, 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 blah. Right? And then when I click the button, though, again, it doesn't do anything, because it's just, button is a little less like that. Input type submit comes with a bunch of functionality built in, but the button doesn't. Okay, let's try a few more things. Let's look at other types of form elements. So we have, what else do we have? We have checkboxes. So let's do a, or we also have drop downs. Let's do a drop down. That'll be fun. So let's do it. We'll do it go back to our code. And let's do it at the top of our username. Again, see how I'm defining the relationship between elements by placing them? It's either above, below, or in an element. Okay, that's how you structure out your website. So now, to have a drop-down, what a drop-down is called, this is sort of half good, is select. Okay, so now you're going to get a closing tag, and then inside, you're going to put in options, right, that you can pick from. So option 1, and then I'm going to just copy and paste this a bunch of times so we have a bunch. 3, 4. Okay, we can change these to option 2, option 3, option 4, option 5, option 6. Okay, and then I'll put another label above here. There is actually an element called label, but I'm just not using it right now. Options, let's say, save, and then back to our browser window and refresh. And now we have oh, why isn't it? Oh, I guess I need to put in the values. Oh, options. Made a little boo-boo. See, HTML is so sorry. See, my error was I had I'll just undo that. Was I had options, but it needs to be option. So I just got rid of all the S's, and it should be working now. Let's go back. And there we go. There's our default. Now notice it kind of, again, all this stuff looks like 1997 or whatever. But that's because in 97, CSS was new. People didn't really use it a lot, and they just used the out-of-the-box stuff. But then designers got in the mix, and they were like, no, we got to make things look a lot better. So they used CSS to change it, right? Oh, and then I still see it sort of worked. It doesn't have to be perfect. See how Dreamweaver, some of these text editors will tell you errors. So it's telling me that don't have a closing tag, but that's because I didn't take the S out of all these ones. So I'm going to take the S out of here, and then it should fix my little error thing there. Okay, yeah, see my errors went away now. Okay, what else can we do here? What else can we do? Oh, we could do, sometimes you might want to have a form where people have like a text area, and that one's pretty straightforward and easy. So let's do a text area here. Like maybe this is a checkout thing, so you might have an area for notes. And then underneath that, I'm going to have, this is a good, well-labeled tag, text area, okay? And then, so the text that you put between this tag will appear inside the box. And then you can give it a default size by specifying the rows. So let's say 20 rows, and the columns will be 20. So we're going to get a square box. And then in here we'll put default text. That's going to be the text that's in the box when you start. Okay, so we're going to save that. Let's switch back. Refresh. Oops, refreshing the wrong thing. Boom. So there's our, oops, a little big, right? Let's go back. Let's make it smaller. So I'm going to go up here, and too many rows. Let's make it like 5 rows and save. Go back. Refresh. Boom. Smaller now. Now we can go in here. We can type some text. Blah, 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 blah. Pretty cool, right? Okay, what other types of form elements can we try out? What about a checkbox? Because that's pretty common, right? So a checkbox is, let me just double check. I'm pretty sure it's just, oh, it's type. So we're gonna go back to our form, and let's say we want to have a checkbox underneath like a terms and conditions, right? So we'll go back to our website, our code, under the text area. We'll say something like, do you accept the terms and conditions? And then we'll put an input type checkbox. Go back here, refresh. There you go. There's my checkbox that I can check now, right? Now I'm just going to go back to the code, and I'm going to do some, just for demonstration, I'm going to put line breaks in there that I normally wouldn't have, right? We'd use CSS to do this, but I'm just going to, just so it looks a little more like a website. So just put line breaks after these elements, so that when I go back here, now it looks like that, right? Okay, now let's say, what if we wanted to have this on by default? So there's this weird, I've never seen this in any other place, but here is the way we have a checkbox checked is we put this weird text here. It's not really an attribute. Like, really it should be checked equals true, but it's not. It's like this. So now when we reload and we go back to our site, it'll be loaded by default. So if I load it, it's checked. Okay? So depending on your use case, you might want to have something either checked or not checked. How about, what should we look at now? Are there any other form elements that we want to look at? Let me see here. Let's look at a radio. Radio buttons. Okay, again, it's just like the checkbox. So what we're going to do is, whoops. Let's just expand. No, we'll just put this on a new line. Okay. So I'm going to create a. I'm going to copy my input element. I'm going to change this to radio. Okay, and then we can just see. I'm going to take I'm going to take checked out of there. And then you would need a bit of text to represent, like, so what would be the options here? It'd be like maybe it's like it's a sign up form, so you might have like the premium service, premium. You might have the, let's copy this. You might have the basic or medium, and then you might have the basic. Okay. So now let's see. Oh shoot, I didn't switch to the code. So here's what I did. So I copied my input field, and I changed the type to radio, and then I created 3, and I put text, premium, medium, basic, all right here. And so now I saved it. I'm going to go back to the browser and refresh. And now we have our radio buttons. Okay, now see how they all turn on. Now radio buttons, it's supposed to be or, right? You can only have one of them on. So what you have to do with a radio button is you have to sort of, you group them. Let me see. I'm pretty sure it's by name. You have to give it a name, and each one the same name. And then what that will do is it'll consider that as a group. So let's try this. So it's let's call it like plan, right? Whatever plan the customer is going to be on. Okay. See, I haven't done this in a little while. So now I save. We're going to go back to my browser. Oh, you know what? Let's just create a couple line breaks too, just so we can see this a little better. So I'm going to create a line break here and another one here. Again, don't do this normally. Use CSS. Just that we haven't learned about CSS. Okay, now I'm going to refresh. And now, if I click on these, you see how you can only click on one. As soon as you click one, the others turn off. Now that's pretty. Now if you were to program that just manually, that would take maybe 10 or 20 lines of code, right? To be like, okay, if one is checked, uncheck the other ones. If you know, maybe not 20, but so you get a lot of functionality built in with just raw basic HTML. Okay, let's see. I think we've covered like most of forms. Let's see. I think there is one here. You know, there's things like, there's some more advanced ones like a date picker. Let's see that. There are just let's see, input type date. Oh yeah, see, you see there's a whole bunch of there's like types of input. So if we go back to here, so there's almost like 20 different ones, right? So let's try input. Oh. Okay. We're going to copy this here. And let's try, like, for example, let's do date. Let's see what that looks like. And this will probably look different depending on your browser. So now let's refresh here. Okay, so now we have a date picker, right? Not sure if that's the best. Like, there are others. You probably, if you're doing a real website, you'd probably want to download, like, get something that's a little better than that. But that comes out of the box with HTML. There's also, let's look at, there's a color picker. So let's do that. Spell it the American way. Go back here, refresh, and so here's our color picker. We can pick there, and it gives you this whole palette. Oh, you can't see it, but it pops up the Windows color picker thing, right? So you get out of the box a whole color picker in HTML. Okay, we're getting close to the end of lecture. Let me know if you guys are having any questions, anything that's unclear you'd like me to focus on, fire it in the chat on the side there, and we can definitely have a look. I just want to check to make sure, because probably what we'll do is before I'll end the HTML with a little peek into CSS. Because it's really so integrated. You would never ever use HTML without CSS. I can't imagine that ever. Like it's never happened for me, right? Just want to double check I've covered all the important elements. Links, CSS. Okay, I think I have. So does anybody have any questions? I think I'm just gonna take a 1-minute break. And I'll be back. I'm just going to get a refill of my coffee. And then what I'm going to do is we'll do another, let's say 15 minutes. And I'm going to introduce a very, very special tag. It's called the div tag. It's one of the most important tags in HTML. And we'll use the div tag as a bridge into talking about CSS. Okay, so don't go anywhere. I'll be right back in like 30 seconds. And we'll keep going. Okay? Okay, I'm back. Okay, we're going to talk about the div tag. So, we're going to go to the top of our web page here. Right to the very tippy top. Right to the top. Just under our body. Okay, I'm going to put in this new tag. Okay? And it's weirdly labeled div. I think it's division. It's meant for dividing up sections, right? Div tag is one of the most important tags in HTML because it's used to do layout. Like a lot of layout is done with divs and CSS. So, what I want to introduce to you is something called the box model. Okay? Let me just get this picture up and going here. So, everything in CSS is a box. Okay? So let me get this view up. So this is from a website called W3 Schools. It's a pretty good resource. Okay, what you're looking at is the CSS box model. So every single element in HTML is a box and has these things, right? It has content, it has padding, which is the space between the content, and the border, which it also has, which is a line between the padding and the margin. And the margin is the space between the elements. The border is the line between the margin and the padding. The padding is the space between the border and the content the content is the content. So everything in HTML is a box. Okay? And manipulating these boxes with CSS is essentially how you do layout in HTML. Okay? So let's go back to our code view. Excuse me. Corona. Okay. So in my div tag, what I'm going to put in is I'm going to put in some text. I am inside a div tag. Okay? And I'm going to save that. And we're going to go to our browser view. We're going to switch over to here. And I'm going to go up to the top and refresh. And where'd it go? Did I save it? Oh, I just didn't scroll up far enough. So here I have this text. I am inside. Oh, and I didn't spell anything right. Ugh. Embarrassing. Okay, I'm just going to save that. Okay, I am inside a div tag. Now you'll notice that it looks basically just like text. Remember when I first just put empty text in the file and it just looked like that? Well, that's because a div tag is just a box. That's it, right? All those other elements we looked at, H1, P, H2, input, A tag, table tag, they're all a box, but more, right? Like a link has all this functionality for linking, and right, I showed you all the functionality you get built into some of these elements. But a div tag is just a box, right? It has no other properties other than to surround other things, right? Okay, so what does that mean? So what you can do with these boxes is basically you do layout, okay? And what we're gonna do is we're gonna introduce style, CSS style. So the way we do that is we're gonna go up into our head, okay? And we're going to put style code in here, right? So we're going to use style tags, and we're going to we're going to put in CSS styles inside those style tags for our HTML elements, right? So there's another way to do CSS. Oh, did I freeze? No, I'm back. There's another way to do CSS, which is to put all your CSS code in another file, which is what I would suggest doing going forward. But for the demonstration purposes of this class, just to introduce CSS, we're just going to do it inside our HTML file, which is something you can do. Okay? So what we can do is in CSS, there's always two parts, right? It's the attribute or there's three parts. The element, the thing that you're going to style, it's either an element, a class, or an ID. We'll talk about those. The attribute that you're going to style, and then the value of that attribute. So let's do an easy example of, let's make the heading 1 red. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type H1, right? Because I want H1 to be a different color. I want to restyle H1. So I open and close curly brackets. Okay, because inside these curly brackets is going to be where, and see, is that yeah. And Dreamweaver was trying to give me some hints of some of the stuff I can put in here. But one thing that's really easy to change is color. So I'm going to put, that's the attribute. I want color, and then semicolon, or colon, and then the value of that attribute, which is red, and then a semicolon, right? That so at the end of all your style lines, you're going to have a semicolon separating them all. Okay, now I'm going to save this and go back to our browser and refresh, and boom, now I have a red header. Awesome. Okay, now we're getting like more to real websites and not just like silly testing websites, right? Okay, but how does that mean? I kind of started this by talking about divs. What does this have to do with div tags necessarily, right? Okay, well, let's go back. What I did here was I referenced the element. So that means that all H1 elements throughout the document, like if I put another H1 here, if I go here and just copy and paste this, right, and put another H1 and go to my browser, all the H1s are going to be red now because I've styled the element type. But what if I only want one thing to be a certain style? Okay, well, what I can do is in my div tag, I can give it a special attribute that's basically a label that then I can reference using CSS. Okay, so that attribute, there's two. It's either ID or class. So you use ID when you want to change one thing, and you use class when you want to change many things. Like let's say you have a class of header that you always want red. So you would create a class called red header. And then you give that class name to any header that you want to be red, because you want some headers red and some headers not. Okay. In this case, I want to give it an ID, right? Because I want to specifically reference this div tag, right? So I'm going to give it an ID, and I'm going to call it, let's call it header. Now there's such a thing as semantic tags. We'd have to get into that in another lecture. We only have a couple minutes left, so I don't want to get into that too far. But so now I've labeled this header, and I've called it, I've labeled this div tag, and I've called it header. So now in my CSS, what I want to do is I want to reference that ID. Okay, and the way I reference an ID is I use the hash symbol, right? And even see Dreamweaver is giving me a hint. It's saying, oh, I looked through all your IDs, and header is one of the IDs that you have. The other way that you can do it is a dot, and that's to reference a class. But for now, we're going to do IDs, so it's called header, right? And so I'm going to open and close curly bracket, okay? And then what I want to do is I want to change something about the div tag, right? I want to make the background color red, let's say. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my CSS here, and I'm going to change the attribute of my div tag that has an ID called header. I'm going to label an attribute called background color. That's the attribute. And let's make it red. Okay? So now anything with the ID red, header is going to have a background color red. So let's switch to our browser and see what that looks like. Okay, cool, right? So divs are a block element. So remember I said there are some elements that take up the whole screen and then have a new line at the end. Divs out of the box are like that. You can change that and turn that off, but for right now, we're not really going to do that. Okay? So let's think, what else can we do? Let's say I want this I want this text to be centered inside my div box. Okay, well, what we can do is go back to our CSS code, right? All this stuff here is CSS code. And in our header, I'm going to set the property called text align, right? Because what that means is it's going to say, oh, no, that's not the right one. Text align. Okay, what that means, wow, why do you keep picking that one? Align, please. Thank you. Okay, so what that means is everything, all the text inside that div box is going to be whatever I set here. So I want it to be centered. Okay? And now let's go back. Boom. So now it's centered, right? Okay. Now what if I want it, doesn't look good where it's so close to the edge, right? To have text inside and it's right on the border. So I want to create some space. I want to create some space in the div tag. So remember I said everything is a box, right? In HTML, all things are a box. And the thing that you do to increase inside between the content and the border is you increase padding. So let's go back to our style for our div, and we're going to style the padding, right? So let's make it 30 pixels. That'll be nice and big, and we'll be able to see it. So let's go back and refresh. And there we go. Now we have a nice big like header kind of thing with lots of space, right? And now we're thinking, oh, you know what? That text doesn't really look good. It's black and it's too small. So let's go back to our code. And let's go up here, padding. So we have our padding, but actually let's go into our text. Let's make our text inside our header. Let's make it an H1. And you might be thinking there's going to be a problem with that, but that's okay. We'll see that in a minute. So I saved it. We're going back to the browser, refresh. Okay, now you can't see it because the text and the background are red. So let's go back. let's change our heading. Let's change our header color from red to white. Okay, and we'll go back here and let's go back to our browser and refresh. Okay, now we have a text inside a div box, right? So let's change the text. Let's go back and change it to, we'll make that like our title. So we'll say, let's take it, I'm going to take this code from here, cut it, stick it in here. Okay, get rid of this because that's silly. And then save, go back to the browser, refresh, and boom. Now we have, it's starting to look like a website now, right? You feel like now we can start getting sections and it's not just boring text and like 1980s layout. Now we can really get, like exciting and start doing more stuff. So one other thing we can change. Let's do, let's do, you know what, I'll just show you margin. So let's switch back. So let's say I want to have more space between here, right, and the header. I want to have more space in here. So I can do that two ways. I can make that space above this more, or I can make the space below this more. There's two ways. So let's go back to the code. And what we'll do is we'll do it on the header. Okay. And what we can do, so things like padding and margin, you don't have to set. So when I set padding to be 30, it set the padding all the way around to be 30, but you can set the top, bottom, left, right padding separately. So if I want the margin, I always spell margin wrong, margin bottom to be more, then it's only the bottom. So let's say I want it to be 30 pixels and save that. Now let's go back to our browser and refresh. Whoops, browser and refresh. And so now there's more space. I'll just increase it to like 100 just so we can see it more. Okay, see how it jumped down? So I created a whole bunch of white space. Now obviously that's too much. Let me set it back to like 20 and then that's a little more realistic. Okay, there we go. Now it's back and it's back up, right? So I just changed this. I changed margin bottom to 20 instead of 100. Okay, so you see now how we're using the CSS box. We're using the box model and CSS and HTML to create the layout for a web page, right? Or the start of a web page. Because now you can see how maybe, let's do it real quick. I'll just end on this. This will be the final thing to do. Is maybe, so now we can have 3 headers, right? We'll have one header called header, one called body, and one called footer, right? And that's going to be at the bottom. And then that can be basically our 3 sections. Now there's nothing in there quite yet, but let me just go up here and change footer really quickly. I'm going to create a style for footer now. Okay, and I'm going to change the background color to blue, let's say. And now let's go back to our site. Okay, and so now you see how now we have our footer. Let me just change the HTML really quick so it's a little more reflective. So I could say, you know, maybe we'll make it H3, and I'll say, sorry, let's change the code, and I'll say footer, or like email me or something, you know. Email me, and that's an H3. Save. Okay, see? And then the body, we'll just super quick, we'll do the body. Let's just create a style set for the body. Now, obviously, I'm not the designer. This is not super good, but I'm just making them different colors so you can see. Yellow, let's say. That's really bad for design, but for demo, it's good. Okay, right? And then what I'm going to do is let's put all that content that we had. Switch back here. Let's put all this content, right? This is a portfolio site, my paragraph, my table, my form, all this stuff. We're going to cut it, and we're going to go into our body, and we're going to create some white space, and paste it in our body, save it, go back to our website, refresh, and now we kind of have a web. Look at that. That's a website, right? We just built a website in 1 hour and 25 minutes, right? So obviously there's more to it than that, but that's basically the pattern, guys. Like, this is how it works. Okay, I think I'm going to end the lecture there. I think this is a good way to end. We kind of have something that looks like a website, at least. And I think that's a good spot to end. So before I kind of sign off, does anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask? We could talk about more advanced, if you want to, we could introduce more advanced stuff. How does JavaScript come into this? There are advanced libraries like Bootstrap and things that help you do a lot of this stuff. You can talk about that if you like. No questions from anybody? Now's your chance. Would you please let us know? Yeah, I already answered that one. Yeah. Any comments? Let me know if you enjoyed it, if you learned anything. Was anything unclear? So just a reminder, go ahead and subscribe to my channel. I'm going to be making a lot more content like this. Give the video a like. It always helps. It kind of increases visibility of things like that. Add me on LinkedIn. Let's stay connected, folks. Okay, if there's no questions, I think I'm going to sign off soon. You mentioned that Java. Okay. So not Java, JavaScript. So Java and JavaScript are two different things. Java and JavaScript are not related other than the fact that they have the word Java in the name, right? They aren't related. So Java is a compiled programming language, right? So Android, if you make an app in Android, you're going to use the programming language Java, okay? Which is compiled into bytecode. JavaScript, which is totally separate, is a interpreted scripting language that runs on your browser. The syntax is slightly similar, right? It's based on, it's like a C, the programming language C is sort of like the great grandfather of a whole bunch of other languages. They're sort of based on that C approach generally. Like if you've worked in Java, programming in JavaScript won't be that big of a change. But JavaScript's totally different than Java. So what does Java? So JavaScript is the thing you use on the web on the web. What JavaScript, is it allows you to do programming stuff. So you saw with HTML, we could just do layout, and with CSS, we could do color, basically. That's basic. With JavaScript, now you can do actions. So JavaScript allows you to do animations. So you can have something fade up or drop down or spin around. Like I've made video games with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Other JavaScript, you can do conditional logic. So for example, you could say, if there's 5 characters in a text box, say good. If there's 4, say bad. right? That's other things you can do with JavaScript. You can store variables. You can basically, it's like the workhorse of HTML. It's going to do stuff like, you know, when you click send on a form, JavaScript is the thing that takes all the form field data and sends it up to the server using a technology called AJAX, asynchronous JavaScript and XML, right? So JavaScript is like so if HTML is the frame of your house, CSS is the paint and wallpaper, JavaScript is the electricity and the gas that comes into your house and makes it come alive, right? So Java, yeah, so that's what JavaScript is, right? So remember, there's a big difference between Java, which is for like phones and stuff, and servers and all sorts of things, but it's also but then JavaScript is totally different. It's for the web. Okay, there's a question about semantic tags. Yeah, so remember when we look at my code here, okay, see how I said div ID, like I had a div tag, and then I said ID equals header. So what you can do now in HTML5 is instead of doing that, you can just say, instead of a div tag with an ID header, you just say header and close this off. And then basically it still works like a div tag, but now as a coder, when you're reading through this, it's just a little more clear as what you're looking at, right? But now, so I have to change my CSS. Let's change it. I think we could just, now if I just get rid of this, it should be the same thing. Let's go back and refresh. Okay, see, it's the same thing, but it's just the code is a little more easy, is a little slightly easier to read, right? So instead of having div equals ID header, you just have header now, which makes it a little easier to read. So that's all semantic tags are. It's just it doesn't give you any extra abilities. It just makes the code a little easier to read. You mentioned could be nice to know how Java works here. Yeah, okay. So we talked about JavaScript. Definitely, if you folks are interested, I could put on. So this is, I was planning on doing this as a series. So I think I'm gonna have to postpone the other three. I was gonna do one on CSS, and then one on intro to JavaScript, and one on advanced JavaScript. But I think I'm gonna have to postpone that for a bit because I'm teaching at York next week, so I'm a little busy with that. But what I'll do is I'll send out links to you folks when I do put those seminars on, and I can absolutely take you through JavaScript, because that's where things get really powerful. That's where you start building tools, right? And not just like pretty things that you look at. Okay, any other questions? That was an excellent question about JavaScript. If you create a program in Figma, how do you move it from Figma to a website? You got to code it. That's what developers, that's why they get the big bucks, right? So in tools like Figma, you can click on elements and it will give you like a CSS styling guide. I don't recommend using that, to be honest, because really there's a whole other thing here about design libraries and programmers using reusable components. But basically the way you do it is the developer looks at the picture in Figma and then codes it, right? Looks at the picture and says, okay, how do I get a box like that in HTML? And then does basically what I showed you today, and makes a website like this that looks like whatever the thing in Figma looks like, right? But there's no way to just transfer it over. That's why developers get paid so much, because it's a really complex and hard thing to do, right? So yeah, you can't just move it over. Even in Azure, so in a prototyping tool called Azure, which does actually create HTML prototypes, you can't use that stuff in your production code. It's not, the code isn't good enough for production. It's only good enough for prototyping, right? So even in Azure, the developer is just going to look at the prototype. Like, even remember I said at the beginning that I used to code prototypes? The developer wouldn't even look at my code. They just look at the front end to see what should it look like when they come out, and then they go and do their own programming, right? So yeah, the way to do it is to just code it like I showed you, right? Any other questions? Those are good questions. Very good questions. Very, very good. Very, very good. So this has been fun, guys. I really enjoyed this. I hope you enjoyed it too and learned stuff. You can give me. I love feedback. Shoot me a message on LinkedIn or whatever, or comment on the video. It's always good when like commenting and likes. It really helps out the channel, because then YouTube puts it up in front of other people. What level of coding would one need to learn to speak to a developer? Okay. Well, I mean, you can speak to a developer with no coding. That's fine. But generally, you should... I think it would be good for a designer. I think it would be if you have the time. Like, if you're late in your career, maybe not. But if you're earlier and you're starting, I would say, try and do what I just did. If you can do what I did, you're probably, like create a layout with HTML and CSS. You're there. You're at least can talk about these things, right, and understand how they work. But a fair bit, you have to sort of get to be like an intermediary developer. Like, I don't think I'm really... If I jumped on as a web developer right now, I probably wouldn't be good enough to be a developer. But maybe I'm just below that. So I'd say you don't need to know any code to be a designer and talk to developers, but it helps. The more you know, the more you're able to push back a little bit. Sometimes if they tell you things are going to take a long time or they can't be done, if you know that they can be done, then you can debate a little bit on that. So as much as you're comfortable learning, the more you know. And here's the other reason why this type of stuff is really valuable to designers is I do research as a designer all the time, right? And association. So what I did, let me find this link for you really quick, is using HTML, JavaScript, and a few other technologies, I'm able to create little programs that I can use to do research. Association index flyer, I'm pretty sure it was. Oh no, wait, it's just this. Okay, here we go. So, see, I built this little tool. So I wanted to do I did some research on flyers recently. And I wanted to understand people's mental models around them and what they thought. So I wanted to do this word association task. So what I did is I built this little website, which the users can go here, and I told them, okay, look at that word and tell me how much does the word match to the concept of flyers. And then I want you to click on these buttons. If it's a very good match, click very good match. If it's neutral, click neutral. If it's bad match, click, etc., etc. So I was able to program and code this really quickly, and I've done stuff like this a lot as a designer, as a researcher. It's come in really handy to do this kind of stuff, so I don't have to depend on someone else to do this for me. So yeah, I guess the message is you don't need any code to be a designer, but the more you have, the more it helps. And then communicating with developers, and then also doing stuff like the stuff I just showed you. Cool. Any other questions? Can you recommend any other sources? Yeah, so my YouTube channel, you can take a look. I have a couple of other videos like this that go through some advanced techniques. I have a whole course. So I taught an entire course at Centennial on web development, all front and back end, that I put on here. I'll put the playlist in the chat. There's a whole course there available to you that you can look through. Let me just find the playlist. Playlist. Oh yeah, advanced web programming. So yeah, here you go. I'll paste this here. Mailchimp. Why did you code this website? Okay, so I okay, so I just pasted the link to the YouTube playlist for my full course for advanced. It'll take you all the way front end and back end technologies. Okay, question: why did you code this website instead of using something like Mailchimp? I'm not really familiar with Mailchimp. Isn't it just an emailing service? If it does other things, I wasn't familiar with it. Or Google Forms. I don't know. I just figured it took about as much time to set this up as doing something in Google Forms, and I thought I would probably have to. A lot of those tools, you have to spend time customizing things to get it in exactly what you want. I'm not sure if you could you could probably accomplish this in Google Forms. But then the thing is, so I have this, it's put in directly into a SQL database for me, and then I can take my data into an Excel sheet and work with it very easily. You can probably do that in Google Forms. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I should look into Google Forms and see what more it can do. If you're saying it can do something like this, fair enough. But the point is that you're going to have custom things that you might want to do. Like, so in my PhD, I did all sorts of things like the little tools like this that that were very customized, and I'm not sure if a tool like Google Forms could do it. Maybe it could. Maybe let me know if Google Forms can do something like that. Like it would probably just be a bunch of questions, but I just like the way this was set up, and then I have a lot of control over it. So that's why I did it just a custom build rather than Google Forms. Good question. Any other questions? After this is done, I think I'm going to do some yard work in the backyard. Super nice day today. I also have to finalize my Guelph students' grades. That should only take 2 minutes. Let me know if you have any more questions. Good questions so far. One other thing I would recommend if you're looking into JavaScript, the next thing after JavaScript is Jquery. Jquery is a JavaScript library that basically makes JavaScript easier to use, and it especially a lot of the animation and transitions and stuff, it makes it a lot easier to do that kind of stuff. So Okay, so I think we're coming to the end. I don't see too many questions. I'll give it another minute or two for questions if anyone has any final ones. See, there's still a bunch of people on the stream, which is good. Appreciate you guys sticking around. Polina, are you still there? Let me know if you have any questions. Oh, Flash, good question. No, Flash is not used anymore. Flash is because Apple basically killed it. They blocked it from the iPhone. I think that was the death knell. Flash was a terrible technology because it involved you needed a plug-in, so you could never be assured that people would have the plug-in. So you would have to have like two versions, one non-Flash and a Flash, and it was always used terribly. So now it's jQuery. HTML5 does all that stuff that Flash used to do. It's now built in into JavaScript and jQuery into the browser. So you don't need Flash anymore. I used Flash in university, but I haven't heard Flash mentioned in probably 10 years. It's a goner for sure. Yep. Like I mentioned, I taught a course at Centennial, and we were making games, video games with HTML5, CSS, and JavaScript. We made Pong, we made side scroll like Mario Brothers, like platformers. Yeah, no, Flash is not used anymore. Uh-huh. Awesome. Good to hear. Good to hear. Okay, any last questions before we wrap it up? Okay, if there's no more questions, thanks for teaching. Awesome. Yeah, no problem. I love doing this stuff. Thank you for coming and getting a ticket and staying on and paying attention. Uh, yeah, I'm definitely appreciative of anyone who wants to listen to me jabber on, because I love to jabber. So yeah, again, add me on LinkedIn, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Next Friday, I'm doing a live show. It's more like kind of humorous, trying to make people laugh a little bit, but still talk about design, product design. Like, check, I had a show last week, and I talked with a developer from Blah Digital, and who else? Oh, I talked to a designer out in Halifax. So check it out. It's on my channel. Okay, I think I'm going to let's see here. I think we're gonna wrap it up. If you guys have any questions, you can link me in, or message me on LinkedIn or whatever, or even message in the chat. I think I'll keep the stream going for half hour or so. If you want to throw in something in the chat or whatever. But anyways, thanks for watching, guys. I really appreciate it. Hope you're doing okay with this Corona situation, and maybe we'll see each other soon. Okay, see you later.